A very good morning to all present. I'm Gunjan and I'm going to be your moderator for today's session on cloud governance, tackling cybersecurity challenges. As we all know, the advent of remote work in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic has raised several challenges and opportunities. As more and more enterprises transition to cloud-centric work models to enable remote work, the cybersecurity of cloud infrastructure has gained unprecedented importance. Robust security is imperative to protect data, systems, and applications from theft, leakage, corruption, and deletion. Previously, most people connecting to their corporate network would do so from their place of work, thus accessing their accounts, files, and company servers from within the four walls or the perimeter of the office building, protected by enterprise-grade firewalls and other security tools. The expanded use of cloud applications has meant that suddenly this is no longer the case, and users are able to access the same applications, documents, and services from anywhere. This has brought in the need for new security tools and to reconsider security models that are based on the perimeter of enterprise networks, and the need to bring in trusted third parties for better security. While the flexibility, scalability, reliability, and location independence of cloud services are certainly desirable features, at the same time, the multiplicity of endpoints scattered in various locations opens up new points of entry for malicious actors. Today, we have a star-studded panel of experts with us to discuss ways in which cybersecurity practitioners and policymakers can maximize the benefits of cloud services and minimize related cybersecurity risks. I turn first to you, Mr. Mark Johnston, as the technical expert on the panel. Amid the growing uncertainty during the pandemic, since more organizations are charting their journeys towards cloud computing and digital transformation, what technologies can be used to secure the digital infrastructure and manage the technological risks that organizations face while safely supporting their corporate goals?
Thank you for the question, Gunjan, and thank you for the opportunity to share at this wonderful conference. And the technology change is something that you mentioned in your opening, and that is the movement from a perimeter-based model to one that is very much a buzzword today that's used is zero trust or perimeter-less model. Now, this particular technology change has a massive effect on the legacy applications and infrastructure that organizations have used to protect themselves. Example, network separation and firewalls, which are the traditional technologies that have been used in order to mitigate particular problems that exist inside the organization from being exposed externally. But with this move to cloud, we're seeing the need to actually move to a cloud-first designed approach. Something we at Google for many years have practiced is this zero trust approach, where we don't use a VPN as our primary mechanism to connect our employees to the systems that operate our business or environment. This has been a challenge for many organizations, primarily their legacy application set and the traditional approaches to security have not fared well in this transition to a cloud-first world. So how do we help? I think it's really important to look at the marketplace of the right partners that can help transform your business, ones that are going to allow you to wrap those legacy applications or help you transform where you are in order to be ready for the transition to move to a cloud-based service of operation. And organizations need to be open about their challenges so we can all collaborate together around mitigating the most important risks. I think also the key use of open source and understanding their supply chain risks when leveraging open source becomes a critical function of the way they operate in the cloud. And modernizing their application stack is a digital priority. Something that Google has been opening with and very large on is container-based software application stacks and the open sourcing of the Kubernetes container orchestration framework, which organizations can evaluate on-prem in their environment today and learn to understand how to operate modern application workloads, get the experience with that in order to actually transition to a cloud-first model of operations for particular application sets and data sets. And you mentioned some important areas around data localization. finding the right partners that will allow them to be compliant with either government or industry regulations in the particular country of operation is an important partnership, and making sure that the standards are applied to those cloud service providers that meet those government regulations. This is an important partnership with the industry in order to allow those organizations to safely move from a current environment they have to a compliant environment that meets the regulatory obligations of the organizations that they otherwise under and regulated by.
Thank you so much for your intervention, Mr. Johnston. And since you mentioned data localization, I turn directly next to Mr. Alok Joshi. Sir, currently there are multiple laws that empower multiple government agencies to deal with various aspects of cybersecurity in India. How can the efforts of these multiple agencies be synergized for an effective response to cyber threats? Additionally, since the topic of data localization was brought up, I'd be grateful if you could speak to us about, to what extent can proposed policies like Data Localization Act as an enabler or as a hurdle for enterprises looking to transition their work to the cloud?
Gunjan, I'm afraid I just had to leave and I have come back again on my mobile. Could you please, if it is directed towards me, could you please repeat the question?
Certainly, I'd be happy to, sir. My question was, to what extent can policies like Data Localization act as an enabler or as a hurdle for enterprises to adopt cloud computing models?
No, I think data localization is something which is now inherent in the governance policies of almost every nation. I think we'll have to learn to accept it. And if you see 94% of global enterprises today, they are using cloud services because of the immense advantages that it offers in terms of reduced cost, scalability, and enhanced security. And as far as India is concerned, if you see the government initiatives, especially, if you look at the way Aadhaar has been worked out as a platform for collection of data and processing of data and securing it, I think it is an enabler, and it is something which enhances security and gives confidence to a nation, that its data is well protected. And, the analytics, whatever analytics are being worked out, within the parameters of, security and, I would say, confidentiality also.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that very interesting response, Mr. Joshi. I turn next to Ambassador Lata Reddy. Ma'am, since we've just spoken about the need for coordination and cooperation between enterprises and government, I'm curious to hear from you. Since the Global Commission on the Stability of Cyberspace develops proposals for norms and policies to enhance international security and stability and guide responsible state behavior in cyberspace, but with different nations adopting different regulations for data protection and privacy, what challenges does the GCSE face in developing shared understandings and support information exchange and capacity building to advance cybersecurity globally?
Well, Gunjan, I'm glad you brought this up, because I think the fact of the matter is that governments alone can't really address the entire problem of cyber threats and cybersecurity. We need to bring in all the multi-stakeholder players, by which I mean the policymakers, obviously, because they would be the most important, as well as the technical experts, including legal experts, law enforcement agencies, academia, industry, platforms, users, civil society, and NGOs. And I think that organizations like the GCSC have an important contribution to make, because we are made up of experts from different countries, from different backgrounds. And what we try to do is to achieve a common understanding of what the major issues are. As you know, the work of the GCSC, it was essentially centered around how do we ensure the stability of cyberspace, by which we really did not get into areas like content. We did not get into areas like what this medium is being used for, but we emphasize the fact that you need to essentially have a stable system in order for the internet and for international communications to continue in the way that we depend on it. And particularly in this particular time when we are so dependent on these platforms and these methods of communication, since most of us are working from home and using these tools in order to communicate with each other, I would say the emphasis has to be even more on how do we address these threats. And I think as far as the Global Commission's own work is concerned, as you know, we have put forward, 4 principles, which are responsibility, everybody is responsible, restraint, no state or non-state actor should take actions that impair stability, the requirement to act, that both state and non-state actors should take reasonable and appropriate steps to ensure stability, and finally, respect for human rights. Based on these principles, we evolved 8 norms which have come out, and the norm which perhaps has excited the most interest is the one on the public core of the internet. And perhaps later in the program, we can talk a little bit about that. And we've also come out with specific recommendations. While we commend the work being done in the UN in various organizations, and also other multilateral organizations such as the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise, the Cyber Peace Institute, and so on, I think that there is a real need to bring in all the stakeholders so that we can all sit together and decide how best we keep this medium as safe and stable as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those remarks, ma'am. I turn next to Ms. Chinenye Chizea. Thank you so much for being here, ma'am. I'm curious to hear from you some of the challenges that you may have faced and your experiences in securing the National Identity Management Commission from cyber threats. As I understand, Nigeria recently launched a new national cybersecurity policy and strategy with an aim to strengthen cybersecurity governance and coordination to foster a trusted cyber environment. What are the modalities of its implementation, and what are the challenges that you foresee in the implementation of this strategy in securing Nigeria and the region from newer emerging cyber threats?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. So the policy was signed early this year. And one of the things that has come with this revised policy and strategy is the action plan for implementation. So towards the end of the annex, we have government regulated agencies that are responsible for key tasks that need to be implemented from the strategy. So one of the things that has come up is cooperation within public and private sector. One of the key things we see is the public service relying on private sector sometimes for delivery of cyber and technical capabilities. So we have regulatory agencies. The policy says regulatory agencies have set up so that there's communication, that's emergency response teams, There's communication on threat intelligence within the sector, as well as collaborating across board for the cyberspace so that all stakeholders are aware of possible threats that are oncoming and then deal with them based on whatever risk management plans that they have within their local sector. However, some of the challenges that I can think of, besides funding and cost of tech, some of the challenges that you can think of are cyber skills and capability of retaining those skills. Because what we often see is we have people who man the centers and they're trained and then they move on to better lucrative opportunities. There's also response from stakeholders within the sector, having current cyber drills to keep their skills up to date. All those collaboration teaching challenges are the kind of things that I've seen come up so far.
Thank you so much, Ms. Chisea. I wholly take your point on the need for building capacity and retaining talent as far as cybersecurity skills are concerned as a major challenge that many developing countries, including India, are facing as well. I turn back to you, Ambassador Reddy, if I may. What strategies would you say can be adopted by state and non-state actors to train staff, build capacity and capabilities, and bridge the skill gap that currently exists?
I would say, Gunjan, that where this is concerned, the question of building capabilities, obviously, we need to exchange best practices between states. And this could be done bilaterally, it could be done regionally. There's a new word which has come in, plurilaterally, in groups of states, and of course, globally. And I think organizations like the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise, which I mentioned earlier, are making a good contribution in this area. And I would urge countries and organizations that need help in developing their capabilities to contact the GFCE because they are actually offering training programs and others. As you know, Chris Painter is currently heading this initiative. And it started off as a Dutch initiative, but I think it's really become a global initiative now. I think encouraging, the cooperation between CERTs will also be very, very important, because CERTs essentially are all engaged in this task of building capacities to deal with crises, to deal with cyber attacks, cyber threats, and to bridge the skill gaps. Because frankly, we are all only as strong as the weakest link in the chain. And, if certain countries forge ahead with fantastic capabilities, but there are other countries who have very basic capabilities or no capabilities at all, the entire system can malfunction as a result of a weak link in the chain. Therefore, it's to our mutual advantage that those with advanced capabilities try to help those with less advanced capabilities, share our knowledge, share our best practices, and essentially help with the training, building capacity, building capabilities, and bridging the skill gap, as you mentioned. Because if we don't do this, I'm afraid that with the huge emphasis there is now on the use of this medium, there will be some serious breaches in future. Our financial systems are so connected, our communication sets are so connected. And, I cannot emphasize this strongly enough that unless we come together, cooperate, and work together, the entire system will be seriously affected. Thank you.
Thank you for those remarks, Ambassador Reddy, and that global perspective on the need to bridge the skills gap between countries. I turn back again to Mr. Alok Joshi for a more local perspective on this, since India is in the final stages of clearing its new national cybersecurity strategy. Sir, how do you envision the governance of this new strategy, and what are the steps that this strategy can take to improve coordination and information sharing between government agencies? Mr. Joshi?
I'll just take forward, uh, the remarks of Ambassador Reddy, and to my mind, the national cybersecurity strategy, which is still a work in the making, and basically, I think there are three issues which are involved. One is to secure the national cyberspace and strengthen the nation's cyber resilience, and also synergize resources and enhance cooperation. Now, when we come to building capacities, I think one of the major planks that need to be kind of worked upon is the government and private sector partnership. And I think this is one area that, even non-governmental organizations can contribute immensely. The other aspect is about certification. Ambassador Reddy talked about the wide, differential between the capacities among different countries. Now, what we need today is to build up the processes which can lead to a robust certification, I would say, process, and which is common to, as far as possible, to various countries, among various countries. Now, that is something which would assist even the industry and the government in recruiting people, in finding out, the areas where they are having, gaps in capability. And I think this is one of the major issues that need to be addressed by the national cybersecurity policy. Now, coming back to your question about the local this thing, I think one of the major areas is of critical information infrastructure, which needs to be focused on very strongly by any cybersecurity strategy that is worked out. And this includes the telecommunications, the e-governance sector, and the transportation sector, and allied critical areas. I think this is what needs to be looked into very closely in the policy. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. If I may ask a follow-up question, since you mentioned critical infrastructure, there is a question that has come in from the audience. Since cloud service providers have become critical to a huge number of sectors, therefore, therefore the risk now is that all data is aggregated in the cloud. So should cloud service providers be scrutinized at the same level as critical infrastructure service providers?
I would, to my mind, it depends upon what kind of services they are providing and what kind of data is being, reposed in their clouds, because you will have to have different levels of security for different kind of data. And this brings to the other point that we need to focus more on developing encryption skills. Today, I must say that there is a strong case for investing a lot in encryption technologies, both in the private sector as well as the government. But coming back to the question of whether cloud should be treated as critical infrastructure, it depends upon the sector which they are kind of servicing and what kind of data. And within the cloud also, you have the capacity to build up, use technologies to protect data at different levels through access control, etc. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your response, Mr. Joshi. I turn to Mr. Mark Johnston again to get Google's perspective on this. Sir, at this year's Google's Cloud Next conference, Google announced its Google Distributed Cloud. Could you tell us a little bit about the solutions under Google Distributed Cloud and how they will affect the future of cybersecurity within Google Cloud?
Sure, thank you, Gunjan. Google Distributed Cloud is a mechanism of being able to take some of the technology that we use at Google to run our services and run it on-premise or inside your data center, as well as at the edge for telecommunication providers, leveraging Google's infrastructure and network. And ultimately, you get a managed capability that's watered and fed by Google. But in this instance, it's disconnected so that you can modernize your applications using cloud capability on premises. Now, this is something that's in preview right now, and we're working with many partners to bring that to market, including hardware providers that will make compatibility possible for technology providers to provide in-country services to data centers. But I do want to quickly shift to something that I feel very important is no matter how great a technology we as a cloud provider make, the skills to drive that technology are critical in the success. And we've heard so much from every panelist today around how important the skills of cybersecurity will be to the securing of our digital economy. And we believe that too at Google. So it's really important that we pass that on. And we've committed to 40 million people being educated in Google Cloud skills. We've committed $10 billion US to cybersecurity in Washington just recently to help contribute. And we've committed $100 million to open source security to improve the overall ecosystem. And actually, something that Google Distributed Cloud runs on is part of this open source, which I mentioned earlier, which is Kubernetes. So we believe by democratizing security into open source, we believe by raising the skills of the ecosystem and making it available in an open source compatible form for organizations, will enable a greater hygiene in the environment accordingly to improve the overall security posture. And there was a mention of sort of data classification and encryption by Mr. Joshi. And that's an important aspect. Some data is highly sensitive and organizations aren't yet comfortable moving it to an external entity. Google Distributed Cloud will allow them to keep that information where they feel most comfortable with the trusted technology partners and hardware providers that they have, as well as on top of that, a sort of advanced capability for modernizing their applications enabled by our Anthos or open source Kubernetes technology for containerization.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that intervention, Mr. Johnston. I'll turn again to Ms. Chizeya since capacity building and skill development was mentioned yet again. Since many African countries, including Nigeria, have seen a rise in reports of digital threats and malicious cyber activities as well. Ma'am, in your view, what steps can be taken to increase public awareness and make end users available of possible cyber threats and invest in building up cybersecurity capabilities?
Thank you. So an increased public awareness is essential to encourage behavioral change. Someone quite said on the panel earlier that we are only as strong as our weakest link. So it doesn't matter how much technology is out there, if staff or the general public is not aware of the basic security controls, we then have that leak. Having said that, organizations and nations, because we've seen a lot of disruptions from cyber threats, the disruptions have ranged from digital fraud affecting or illicit financial flows, as well as sabotage. So what organizations and nations can do now to help manage or mitigate these threats is basically to have that greater commitment to cybersecurity, make sure there are enforceable policies or safeguards that are there. It's not enough to have a fancy policy, but how is it implemented? What are the risk management strategies or approaches? Is it being handled? Is someone doing that function correctly? Then where the opportunity exists and the funding is available invest in infrastructure and technologies. I was pleased to hear about the Google distributed cloud technology. I mean, because one of the hesitance for most people in adopting cloud is no control, kind of. So having that on-prem kind of solution with the cloud technology is something that people should actually consider. So invest in infrastructure and technology, protect your information assets, commit to enforcing these robust legislations that are out there, and more importantly, build up the cybersecurity capabilities, because that is what would help ensure security within the cyberspace or information architecture or domain that you work with.
Thank you. Thank you for that kind response, Ms. Chizea. And for you as well, I have a follow-up question from the audience. What are the primary concerns of an information security regulatory body when it comes to cybersecurity and the cloud? What are the issues that are being prioritized here?
Someone mentioned earlier about data location. In Nigeria, we have this organization, it's called National Information Technology Development Agency. And then they have this cloud first policy that was introduced. The benefits for that was to reap the benefits of cloud computing and then adopt this policy for public sector institutions, governments, and government-owned corporations. But basically, one of the key things that has always happened for critical national information infrastructure is the domestication of the data. So it's encouraged that SMEs and IT service provider or IT-enabled service providers for governments use these cloud technologies and help with the huge capital investment for IT as is required for this migration.
Thank you. I'll turn back again to Mr. Mark Johnson, if I may. Since if you could tell us about some of the most common reasons for cloud security breaches, I think all of us will have a better idea of what exactly are we spreading awareness about. What are some of the main issues that lead to cybersecurity breaches on the cloud?
Sure. I think it's a very interesting question. And I think it really comes around to a lot of the subject matter that we've spoken about today. But I'm going to start by saying, inherently speaking, the security of the cloud service providers is greater than what exists in the market today on premise. And I'm going to put that out there as a foundation. Now, as we've stated, it doesn't mean that we can successfully drive that for a security outcome if we haven't trained the individuals to understand the visibility and control options that they have on the environment, and even including, as was mentioned by Mr. Joshi, the encryption and control options that it need to exist. So it's really important that we have an understanding of what we call cloud security posture management, and we understand at all points in time, in near real time, because the technology for the cloud enables that, all of the particular assets that exist, the rules, the policies, the particular data classifications that exist in your cloud infrastructure. And importantly, we have the understanding of where we've made a configuration mistake, because the majority of cloud issues today are configuration errors, not on behalf of the cloud service provider, but actually in behalf of the customer operating this new fantastic technology stack to help improve their business. And that's important. We put appropriate technology risk management and what we call guardrails around the way we access this technology. So one of the ways that we do this is we help customers by operating encryption in the way that works for them, including the ability for them to hold the encryption keys on premise and make sure that if they do make a mistake in the cloud, that information that was in the cloud cannot be decrypted without that particular key on premise. Now, encryption is a complex technology. It's not something that every organization fully understands how to achieve. So there's an important function for the cloud service provider to automate that and make it easy for the organization to consume. And once again, that democratization of advanced technologies such as confidential computing and ubiquitous encryption approaches are areas that we are investing in to make easier for organizations to feel safer on the cloud. But still, I really do come back to the majority of problems are configuration mistakes. So importantly, we must come back to the education needs and the focus on bringing everybody on the journey to cloud through reskilling and retraining to create a safer digital economy through investment in the people that will make this change possible for all of us to leverage this outcome for our governments and our enterprises.
Thank you, Mr. Johnston, for that very helpful overview of what causes most cybersecurity breaches and the importance of upskilling cybersecurity professionals to understand the importance of proper configurations and to avoid those errors and open up avenues for attacks by malicious actors. I'll turn to Lata Reddy ma'am again, and if you could speak to us a little bit about the GCSE norm on the public core of on protecting the public core of the internet and how that's impacted by these newer challenges that we are facing, that we're seeing in the cybersecurity landscape today. Do you think there is need to talk about developing newer norms to tackle these new challenges, or would the current norms suffice?
Well, as far as the GCSE norm on the public core of the internet is concerned, we, in our explanatory note on this norm, we said that defining the public core is challenging, as there are many different kinds of attacks that could impair the general availability or integrity of the internet itself. But there are obviously certain components that one would target if trying to have a broad impact through an attack. And we say that the public core of the internet includes critical elements of the infrastructure of the internet, such as packet routing and forwarding, naming and numbering systems, the cryptographic mechanisms of security and identity, transmission media, software, and data centers. And while we go into some detail in explaining why we included these elements, finally, we conclude by saying that experts believe that far more categories of internet and ICT-enabled infrastructure are deserving of protection. So this definition needs to be broadened in the future. And I think the increasing dependence on cloud governance certainly comes into this category. So we have always maintained that the norms put forward by the GCSE are essentially there for people to build on. You know, we don't take them as sacrosanct or a static process that is now over, you know. So we would be very happy if this definition could then be refined further. And while it's already been adopted in a broad form by the European Union, the Paris Call for Peace, and many other organizations, and several countries have endorsed this norm, we would welcome broadening it to meet the challenges of today, you know, including the challenges thrown up by the increasing dependence on cloud governance. So I hope that answers the question.
Absolutely. Thank you for those remarks, ma'am. It's definitely heartening to see that we're taking an evolutionary approach to norms given the evolving landscape of threats that we are facing on the cybersecurity front. I have another question from the audience. This one I believe would be best directed to Mr. Alok Joshi again. So what are the possible opportunities in the areas of concern in cloud for the private sector to pitch in the Indian context?
I think one of the areas, as I mentioned, is about certification. And I'll just elaborate on this aspect. You see, we are conscious today that we need, almost 1.5 million skilled workers, particularly for cybersecurity, which include, people who are specialists in network security, in encryption technologies, etc. Now, the point is that unless you have a robust certification process, which is not only generic, but also sectoral, it will be very difficult to bridge this gap. Although today I can say with some confidence that there's enough talent lying in the industry, in the academia, which can fulfill these requirements. So for, I would say certification process, you need to have very strong audit capabilities, and then only, you'll be in a position to have the confidence to protect, your critical systems. I hope that answers the question to some extent. Thank you.
Certainly, Mr. Joshi. I think we have consensus and we all agree on the importance of upskilling and cybersecurity skill building, and have also you've also identified that as an area where the private sector can pitch in. I'll turn next to Ms. Chizia again and put to you, ma'am, in 2016, Nigeria had set up its Cybercrime Advisory Council. How effective has this institution been in tackling cybersecurity issues, especially with respect to cloud services in the region?
So the Cybercrime Advisory Council was set up when Nigeria had its first 2014. It was kind of the action to have like a governing council to oversee the cybersecurity landscape of the country. And it's been an interesting journey. It's made up of public, private, and industry experts. And so far, they've done a good job in implementing enforceable tasks and solutions. So when it comes to the cloud, we as a country have grown. We have so many private sector organizations, if I can name a few, One, and so who are local companies delivering IT-enabled services for government agencies or small, medium enterprises, especially as we saw with the pandemic, a lot of e-commerce options, the digital economy is growing. And this council has been able to give like a direction or kind of like a guide on activities that govern the cloud security space. I think Mark mentioned earlier when he was talking about democratization of the security controls in the cloud infrastructure. So that's basically what's been happening with the council. They've brought up policies, and because they are made up of different stakeholders, whether private or public, it's been, I want to say, effective to an extent. And the cloud industry has grown so far for us here in Nigeria. And I believe something similar is replicated across other African countries.
Thank you. I'll turn back again to Mr. Johnston on this, since we've touched upon the issue of cybercrime. Since mining blockchains and that underpin cryptocurrencies require a significant amount of computing power and expensive software, Google's in-house cybersecurity team has recently warned that cryptocurrency miners are hacking compromised cloud accounts. What steps can we take to tackle this variety of cyber threats, sir?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Gunjan. And it's very true. What we're seeing here is that a compromise of a particular cloud resource, which often has significantly greater technology resources than organizations used to have because of this almost unlimited style of growth and capacity, means that any abuser of that service then can actually accelerate the usage and abuse of the service to mine cryptocurrency services. It is important to state this can happen to anyone on-prem or in cloud, but we have seen that these malicious gained access to the cloud instances by taking advantage of poor customer security practices and vulnerable third-party software in nearly 75% of these cases. We're all currently, as cybersecurity professionals, dealing with the Log4j vulnerability that is rolling around the world at the moment. Another example of these vulnerabilities in third-party software that may be running in your infrastructure. These are used as entrances into then the abuse of these cloud services. 48% of those compromised instances were attributed to actors gaining access to internet-facing services that had no password or weak passwords for user accounts and API connections as well. So once again, a hygiene error on top of these third-party vulnerabilities that may allow entrance in the beginning. And that 26% were that third-party attributed software installed by the operator of that cloud instance themselves, not the cloud service provider, but actually the individual customer or tenant running in the environment. So what are we seeing as a theme? Configuration management, we came back to that as an important aspect. Good hygiene in operations of passwords accordingly, and supply chain and understanding the third-party dependencies in your software. Today, Log4j is an open source Apache software stack. We have actually open sourced how we at Google secure our stack. It's called salsa.dev, slsa.dev, the mechanism we do for supply chain integrity in an open source manner for any organization to look at applying that process to their organization. And we've built the capabilities to operate that supply chain security, something called what we call binary authorization. Complex word, but operated as a service in our Anthos stack on cloud or in that Google distributed cloud service that we spoke about earlier. And then on top of that, dependencies are an important part of the software library organization. In understanding those, deps.dev, another Google open initiative to understand the dependencies in your application packages. I know that was all very technical, but it really comes down to training and understanding your dependencies, understanding your configuration options to protect your organization, and good hygiene and practices for authentication, authorization, and auditing in the way that you operate your environment will help protect you from that cryptocurrency mining exploit, which is a quick gain for criminal organizations that are then trying to exploit those services themselves.
Thank you. Thank you for those valuable insights, Mr. Johnston. I fully take your point. In addition to upskilling and capacity building, you've also raised the issue of cyber hygiene, which I recall is also one of the norms that the GCSE has been looking at. So I turn again to Ambassador Reddy on this. Ma'am, how can the norm to promote cyber hygiene help us in better governing the cybersecurity challenges in cloud governance?
I think cyber hygiene cannot be emphasized enough. I go back to the point that the users need to be educated, right? And it's not enough for us to say that that certain procedures should be followed, like frequently changing passwords and so on and so forth, not sharing your password with others. And I think that users are essentially key to cyber hygiene, and individuals, and by users, I mean individuals as well as organizations, enterprises, governments, all of us essentially are users of the cyber medium. And therefore, we essentially have to practice cyber hygiene. I can tell you from my own experiences in government, it's very difficult to persuade people to frequently change passwords, for example. They say it's bad enough creating one password and remembering it. Why do I have to keep frequently changing it? And I must admit, I myself at times get exasperated when I keep getting notices saying, we've noticed a hack attempt and please change your password yet again. I don't recall how many times I've had to change my passwords for my email accounts, for example. Cyber hygiene standards do exist. They've been gaining wider international acceptance as governments and enterprises have been understanding the importance of taking these steps, and which do demonstrate that you can reduce the danger of known malware by practicing cyber hygiene. But I think that, again, I come back to the question that many societies face considerable challenges in the use of ICT technologies. And again, I would make this appeal to states that have greater knowledge of how to combat these threats to come forward to help those states that do not have the same level of knowledge. Because again, unless all of us are safe, none of us is safe. So, this is where cyber hygiene is so very important. And again, here you come into the multi-stakeholder issue, which I've mentioned earlier, that you can't do this alone. Governments alone can't implement cyber hygiene. They can't force people to practice good cyber hygiene. And but you can educate. Digital literacy is important. You have to explain to people in terms that they will understand, particularly in a developing country like India, where people just see it as a tool. They don't see the dangers. You have to educate them about the dangers. You have to show them how they can protect themselves, at least against some basic attacks. And I can't emphasize enough how much resonance this norm on basic cyber hygiene that we came out with for GCSE, how much this has resonated and how many questions we've had on this particular norm. I would say perhaps after the electoral systems and maybe public norms, the public core of the internet first. The second one on which there was great interest was the electoral systems infrastructure. And the third perhaps was cyber hygiene. So it remains a very important and live issue for all of us.
Thank you for those insights, Ambassador Reddy. And since you mentioned electoral infrastructure, that takes me back to Mr. Johnson's comments on democratizing access to technology and security. In that vein, the Indian government has taken several initiatives to develop open networks and open digital ecosystems, including the Open Network for Digital Commerce program to democratize online commerce. I'll turn to Mr. Alok Joshi, sir, on this. While these initiatives do certainly democratize access to technology, do government agencies and the end users in our context have adequate cybersecurity and privacy awareness to tackle cyber threats? What are the steps that the government can take to promote cyber hygiene in these newer initiatives?
That's a very interesting question, and to the way the GEM platform has developed. It's a platform which was developed basically for procurement of goods and services for the government. And mind you, Gunjan, most of the organizations, in fact, all the organizations of the government, whether they are related to security or commerce or any public service, they are registered on this platform. And my personal experience has been that it has been a very robust platform. It envisaged in the first place, and it has improved over. And mind you, the democratization of the procurement process itself has resulted in enormous savings. So coming back to your question, whether there is capacity for building up such platforms and securing them, I think there should not be any doubts on that count. But again, I come back to the question, how do we do it? We need to focus again and again on the processes. And the processes include developing capabilities across the spectrum. It is not good enough for A organization or B organization to have that capacity. I think you need to have a common certification program, both for building capacities and for auditing those capacities. I think that is something which we need to stress upon. And unfortunately, I think this is the ground situation which sometimes is overlooked, by policy planners. But I would, again re-emphasize this point. You have to look at the ground and build your, capacities ground up. That is the way to go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Joshi. Ms. Chizay, same question. What can governments do to disseminate the importance of cyber hygiene amongst end users of newer and emerging technologies?
I'm in agreement with my co-panelists. We cannot overemphasize what it is when it comes to educating people, and education is at different levels. I know I touched on the skill gap earlier, but I was talking about the tech team then. Now for the basic user, just as the ambassador mentioned earlier, we need to bring the education down to the language they understand. What means of communication? This is where the communication experts and specialists come in. How do you get this information across to them? In what language? We have so many people around who is their passion to pass this information to people at the grassroots level, for those in the offices, executives. How is this information or education about protecting their information? Again, for the tech people, just as Mark had mentioned earlier, configuration mistakes is basically what is the issue with cloud security. And then it's not just making the mistake, because the mistakes happen. How do you recover? Because what we see sometimes is just punitive measures and pushing that under the carpet, or sweeping it under the carpet, instead of learning from that to build robust and secure systems. So the education in this case can be like a knowledge management, where you manage the incidents that have occurred, have that, I don't want to say database, but have that way in which others can learn from what to do, what not to do, how to best configure a new application coming up, domiciled for each organization or even countries, those policies that you have, bringing it down to the level for the different sectors. What does this strategy or policy mean to us as a sector? How are we going to best implement this task that has been assigned to us? And that way, everybody learns from the issues that are on ground and basically enables or engages with the new technologies that are available. So basically, all I'm just trying to say is that governments need to have strong commitment and support for cloud computing service adoption. Without that commitment, it doesn't matter what the private sector brings as a new tech and new tech that we can engage in or use to provide services. That commitment is essential, especially also from the cloud service providers. When you market this solution for an organization, what have you done? Is there like a readiness assessment for that organization? How best can they adapt to this new cloud service that you're providing for them? That way, the chain of information flow and how best to secure it will be best enabled, and when we'll maintain our cyber hygiene, as been mentioned.
Thank you, Ms. Chizé. I take the point fully on the need for the private sector and governments to cooperate and collaborate on this, and how ensuring the cybersecurity is in fact a shared responsibility. I'll turn back again to Mr. Mark Johnston. Sir, if you could tell us a little bit about some of the initiatives that big companies like Google can take in order to spread more awareness and educate the end user in being ready to face these newer challenges.
Thank you, Gunjan. This is something I'm very passionate about, because working for Google as a company, we have the ability to protect billions of users' information at scale, including educating our next generation of users in the education environment, our children. And one of the ways we're doing that in India, we launched our Be Internet Awesome Kids Safety Program. And I believe that we're training everyone in understanding privacy and security when we educate the next generation of technologists and everyone in general, the population, how to protect information, understand bad actors on the internet, understand good hygiene and behavior, when to protect and not to trust based on additional signals that they learn from. And we do it through a gamification method that they can play a game accordingly and learn that in the classroom in partnership with training programs for teachers as well. So this is an area that we're very passionate about helping support the broader ecosystem globally as we roll out Be Internet Awesome to more countries around the world, localizing it in languages that makes it greater consumability. And we have an obligation. We can block a URL on over 4 billion devices globally as a company. And we do that to protect the internet with our free service called Safe Browsing. So we can help to find these problems, help to mitigate these problems in partnership with industry. And then as well, why can't you learn from Google technology? Ms. Jazaya said, great, how can I learn about how Google does incident response? Well, we publish a white paper on how Google does incident response based on NIST 800 frameworks that are open, frameworks that we use successfully, and how we provide the ability to respond to these particular challenges. So we're really encouraged to greater democratize security because it raises the trust of digital safety for everybody. And that's great for everyone to get citizen access, safer access to banking, financial systems, and confident in the overall digital transformation of a country. These are areas that we're very passionate about sharing more on, and we'll continue to invest in as we go forward. And we've committed to public sectors around this.
Thank you. Thank you very much for highlighting those initiatives that Google has taken, Mr. Johnson, in this respect. I think it's been a fascinating learning exercise for me here from this star-studded panel today. We started out by talking about the emerging challenges that the rise of cloud computing presents, how perimeter security models have been replaced by zero trust security models. I'm delighted to see that there is consensus among the panelists on the need for more capacity building, greater upskilling in the area of cybersecurity talent, as well as the importance of propagating and disseminating good cyber hygiene practices. So the question that I now want to put to the panel, and I would love for all of you to intervene in this respect, is in the net effect. We've now discussed the challenges that the rise of cloud computing presents. We've seen the opportunities that it presents for enterprises to upscale and enable remote work and have the economy thrive even in trying times like these. So in the net effect, would you say that the rise of cloud computing presents more opportunities or more challenges in the net effect, and why? I don't want to put anyone on the spot, so I'll see if there are any volunteers to go first. Ambassador Reddy, you have your hand raised, please.
Yeah, Gunjan, I would say overall, I would say there are more opportunities because a lot more people now are able to work from home. They have access to much more information. But at the same time, I can't say that it's an unmixed blessing, because there are these dangers as well of concentrating so much data together, of putting everything in the cloud. If you lose the cloud, you lose it all. And so but overall, I would say I see it as a positive opportunity more than as a threat, because the threat has always existed, ever since, I would say, the last 10, 15 years. Definitely, it's the threat perceptions have grown stronger, and there's a kind of a fear psychosis that has come up in many people about putting too much online. So threats are something we've learned to live with, and yet to continue to use the medium. So my own feeling is it is more positive than negative, but we must remain alive to the possibilities of misuse and to the possibilities of attacks. But overall, I think technology has been a wonderful miracle, which we must understand. And we're able to communicate now like this, which would have been unimaginable even, I would say, 10 years ago. These kind of platforms were not so popular. and were very restricted to just companies and so on. Today, we're all able to speak on these platforms. That in itself is an amazing advance. So overall, being an optimist, I would say it presents more opportunities than challenges. Thanks.
Thank you, Ambassador Reddy, for that dose of cautious optimism, if I may say so. I turn next. Again, I'm not going to call on people if we have any volunteers to go next. Mr. Joshi, yes, please.
Gunjan, it's a very interesting thought that when organizations like MI6, MI5, and GCHQ of the UK have the confidence to bring the data on cloud, of course, with data localization, and I'm sure with very strong encryption methodologies, I think we should feel quite reassured. But taking forward what Ambassador Reddy has said, we need to be conscious also of the pitfalls. And I think there's enough capacity in the system to build up resilience within the system to meet any challenges that may come on the security side. So overall, I think that we should feel optimistic. Cloud has come to stay, and I think we'll have to learn to kind of take care of the security aspects. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Joshi. I'm delighted to see that there is more optimism so far. Let's see if that changes with our next speaker.
Well, I don't think it changes. I think it's the opportunity that we all need to embrace. We're happy with the adoption process so far. From here on the government side, it's a bit slow, but we're getting there. Like Mr. Josh mentioned about when you see MI5 getting on cloud computing, it's a confidence booster. And so, like the ambassador mentioned earlier, we live with threats. We can see what's going on with the pandemic. We're living with it. We're moving on. So we need to embrace or adopt cloud computing technologies. I'm happy to stand by the fact that it's more of an opportunity and a blessing. The new stuff and the fact that we no longer consider vendor locking. There's so much exchange going on, different multi-cloud service providers, open services, and what we've mentioned so far, and we cannot overemphasize, is in the configuration management. So yes, it's an opportunity, and I'm glad to see that it is here to stay, and most businesses and organizations are adopting the best part of the cloud. We don't talk about what the bad actors are doing with cloud, but we're happy with what's going on so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chizea. That leaves us with our final panelist, Mr. Johnston. Your thoughts on the matter?
Sure, and of course I might be a little biased on this one, but honestly speaking, I wouldn't be working for a cloud company in cybersecurity if I didn't think that was the ability to democratize advanced security capability for enterprises that make it easier and citizens and government to create their businesses on more securely. The ability that's been mentioned, we have FedRAMP certification for our GovCloud infrastructure, but that's across our public cloud globally. Our controls and the ability for organizations to feel confident to leverage their region in Delhi or Mumbai, that they can have the confidence it's got the same level of security controls that a US government uses for their infrastructure, is something that's just never been available to many organizations in that way. Confidential computing is complex. Advanced encryption techniques is complex. What about you can get that without large capital expenditures? And look at the digital natives that exploded, the unicorns during this time to address the needs of individuals, whether it be food delivery in Indonesia or around the world through these companies that have popped up overnight that have then created connections between people who are sitting there with their business needing to connect to the end users, creating that small business digital connection through super apps that have come together. And a lot of this wouldn't have been possible if those digital natives needed to buy a big data center in that way. They wouldn't have been able to get there, iterate at speed, fail fast, and create innovation. And doing it safely, that's what excites me. So I am an extreme optimist with regard to what cloud can bring and how we can work as service providers to improve the hygiene of the ecosystem, both in training and the processes, but also take some of the burden away, that we can take care of a lot of the infrastructure and water and feed it very well with our techniques that will allow you to focus on what makes your business and government more important in serving its users or citizens. So thank you for the opportunity to share that.
Thank you very much for sharing your optimistic thoughts with us, Mr. Johnston. I think it certainly adds a certain brightness to our day today. All the optimism that I'm absorbing from the panelists this morning. So I'm mindful of the time. So we'll very quickly move on to the final question, given that we are all in agreement on the fantastic, massive opportunities that the rise of cloud computing presents for nations and enterprises altogether. I suppose the question that then remains to be answered is in making the most of these opportunities that are presented to both governments and enterprises. How can governments and enterprises prepare themselves to tackle the cyber threats that are expected with the adoption and exploitation of these opportunities? If I may call on Mr. Joshi this time.
Well, again, what comes to mind is, unless you have open partnerships between government and enterprises, both in private and government and private sector, I think that is the way to go forward. And I think that is something which is required not only in cybersecurity aspects, but also in developing very strong capabilities. I just can't fail to underscore that point, that unless and until you have common programs running across various sectors, which give some kind of confidence to the industry that there is a certain level of competence which has been achieved, I think that is where the government needs to put its resources in. Thank you.
So greater collaboration and open partnerships between the public and the private sector. Thank you so much for that input, Mr. Joshi. If I may turn to Ms. Chizea next on this point. Beyond cybersecurity, capacity building and skilling, what can governments and enterprises do to prepare themselves for threats that are expected now?
So it's the continuous knowledge sharing. I mentioned earlier about certs. One of the things we practice here is sectoral certs. So the threat intelligence you get from these organizations is huge. It's able to read the noise and find what is important to you. So governments around the world have recognized the potential for cloud computing. And what we should consider now is understand the threats that are out there and see how best we can overcome or mitigate the challenges that these threats provide. And having these emergency response teams use the technology that they have for understanding the available threats and also disseminating the threats to the local industry would help curb some of the issues that we've observed and the vulnerabilities that are out there. I think Mark talked about the Log4j, and there's been so much joke about security operatives preparing to go for an end-of-year holiday, and boom, Log4j is around to keep them back at work. So these are the things that we're talking about out here. We need to continuously collaborate, both government, public, private, all institutions, all hands together to secure our information assets. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chizea. Ambassador Reddy, concluding thoughts.
Well, I would certainly say that government and private sector has to cooperate. And just a very quick anecdote that, we set up the first joint working group between the private industry and the government in India. It was amazing how many goals and aims we had in common. So contrary to public opinion, I think there is a common goal. And if we work out good mechanisms by which the private sector and governments can work together, nationally as well as internationally, I see no reason why this can't be a very rewarding partnership.
Thank you, Ambassador Reddy. Concluding remarks from the private sector, Mr. Johnston, your thoughts on the issue?
Yeah, I think all trust is built on a form of transparency, and the transparency from us cloud service providers is important. You know, a constant mention today is sort of the audit, the third-party independent audit based on industry global standards. This is an important part of building confidence that we are doing what we've committed to do to the marketplace accordingly. And on top of that, we do have a huge amount of threat intelligence data that we can work towards operationalizing in a manner. Log4j has been a real challenge for many organizations right now. We've deployed edged protections to our firewalls and our web application firewalls so customers can be protected. We've created search mechanisms and published those so organizations can help find the problem. We want to contribute greater to that ecosystem, improve the collaboration between us all, and that transparency and openness and that open source view of the world for us is very important in the way we work with governments and enterprises alike.
Thank you, Mr. Johnston. And with that, we come to a close for the close of this very interesting panel discussion that we had today. It only remains for me to thank all the panelists for their time and indulgence in answering all my questions very patiently today. And thank you to all those who attended. This is me signing off. Thank you very much.